3 years ago, something began calling people by their full name in a small barrio in the Philippines. Always after dark, always from just beyond the tree line. Everyone who lived there knew the rule. You do not answer. One man answered. He lost 2 hours and came back different. Rowena heard her own name on her first night home. Her grandmother's voice came through the wall immediately. Huwag, sumagot. Do not answer. What Rowena did next was not what anyone in that barrio expected. She went toward it, not to answer, to explain. This is her account, everything. The names called from the bamboo grove, the old forest cleared without consultation, the healer who died without an apprentice, and what the entity said when someone finally spoke to it without fear is exactly as she described it to me. The bus from Manila arrived in the afternoon, and by the time Rowena had walked the last kilometer from the highway down the dirt road into the barrio, the light was already going orange through the coconut palms. She had not been back in 3 years. She had told herself it was the school schedule, the travel cost, the difficulty of the buses during Holy Week when every provincial route ran over capacity. All of that was true. None of it was the whole reason. Her grandmother was waiting at the gate. Lola Carding was smaller than Rowena remembered. Not frail exactly, but reduced the way very old people become reduced, as if the years were slowly returning them to something more essential. She was 79 and had lived in this house since before Rowena's parents were born, and she held the gate open with the unhurried ease of someone who had been doing it their whole life. "You came," she said. "Of course I came," Rowena said, and this was mostly true. The house was the same. Nipa walls, a low tin roof that amplified rain into something enormous, the smell of wood smoke and dried fish, and the specific combination of her grandmother's soap and the particular earth of this place. Rowena's old room was kept the way it had always been. Narrow bed, a small wooden shelf, the window that looked out toward the bamboo grove at the back of the property. She ate, she bathed with water from a pail. She sat with Lola Carding on the porch and watched the dark come in over the fields. Her grandmother was quieter than usual, or perhaps Rowena had forgotten how quiet she was. They did not talk about why she had been called home specifically, or what Lola Carding's doctor had said at the last visit in March. They talked about the neighbors, the recent weather, the price of rice. By 9:30, Rowena was in bed and asleep before she had finished deciding to be. She woke at midnight. The room was dark and the house was quiet, in the way rural houses were quiet, not silent, but full of the sounds that were always there once you stopped moving. Frogs in the grass, the shift of the roof in the night air, a dog somewhere across the barangay. Then her name. Her full name, given name first, then her family name after it. Both syllables of each placed carefully, the way you said a name when you wanted to make sure the person knew it was them you meant. It came from outside the window, from the direction of the bamboo grove. Not loud, not a shout. A call, the way you called to someone you expected to answer. Rowena sat up. She did not move for a moment. She listened. The frogs continued. The dog had stopped. The voice did not come again. From the next room, quietly but clearly. Huwag, sumagot. Do not answer. Her grandmother was awake. Her grandmother had heard it too, and had been waiting and knew exactly what to say. Rowena did not answer, but she got up from the bed and went to the window. The bamboo grove was 15 meters from the house, running along the back edge of the property, where the land dropped slightly before the fields began. In the daytime, it was ordinary, a cluster of tall, pale green stems, leaves moving in any small breeze. At this hour, it was a column of darkness, the bamboo catching the faint moonlight in thin strips. Something stood at the grove's edge, pale, still, in the shape of a woman, the outline of a woman, standing between two bamboo stems with the stillness of something that had been there for some time and expected to remain there longer. Rowena could not see a face. She could not tell the distance precisely, but the shape was there and it did not move. And it was not a trick of the light, because the light did not move either. She stood at the window for a long time. Then she went back to bed and lay on her back in the dark and listened to the frogs begin again, one by one, until the sound filled the room back up and the window behind her was just a window. She did not sleep again until almost 4. The morning after, Rowena helped her grandmother shell peanuts on the porch and did not bring up the voice. She had learned, returning to the barrio, that the rhythm of information here was different from Manila. In the city, you ask directly and expected a direct answer. Here, things came in their own order, when the person telling them had decided they were ready to be told. Pushing produced nothing except closed faces and shorter sentences. She had forgotten this. She was remembering it now. She spent the morning relearning the pace of the place. By afternoon, she had a reason to be moving through the barrio. Her grandmother had asked her to bring a small package to a neighbor 2 streets over, and on the way back, she stopped at the small sari-sari store near the barangay hall, where 3 or 4 people were usually sitting in the late afternoon, doing nothing in the comfortable way of people who had earned the right to do nothing. She bought a soft drink, sat down, and let the conversation go where it went. After 20 minutes, she asked, in the way you asked things you were only a little curious about, "Yung mga kwento dito, totoo pa ba yung sinasabi ng lola ko about sa mga naririnig sa gabi?" There was a brief pause. Then the conversation opened. It was Aling Tessie who went first. She was 60-something, a retired laundry worker, and she described it with the flat, matter-of-fact tone of someone reporting a thing they had stopped finding remarkable. 3 months ago, past 11 at night, her own name, her full name, the one her parents had given her, and that almost nobody used anymore, called from outside the kitchen window. She had known not to answer. She had sat very still until it stopped. She had not told her husband because he would have worried, and worrying would not have helped. The man beside her, a younger man named Ronnie, a tricycle driver, described something similar, except the voice had called his mother's name, not his. His mother was dead. He had heard the voice twice. The second time it sounded more certain of itself, like it had practiced. Then someone said, "Ask Mang Carding." Mang Carding was 61, a farmer, with the kind of face that had been worn by outdoor work into something permanent and unreadable. He was sitting at the far end of the bench with a glass of water, and he looked at Rowena for a moment before he spoke, as if he was deciding how much of the story she needed. He told it simply. 3 years ago, his name called from beyond the fence line at the back of his property. He had been half asleep on his porch, and he answered before he remembered that you did not answer. He stood up, he said. He walked toward the voice. He came back 2 hours later and found his wife standing at the door shaking. He had no memory of the 2 hours. He still had no memory. Iba na siyang ngayon. His wife had told someone who had told someone else, and now the whole barrio knew it, and Mang Carding did not deny it. He simply looked at his water glass and said nothing further. Rowena asked carefully when the calls had started. The people at the sari-sari store looked at each other in the way people looked at each other when they already knew the answer. 3 years ago, the same month the provincial road project had cleared a section of the old forest at the barrio's northern edge. Before that, Aling Tessie said, "I never heard anything like this. Voila, 30 years I've lived here. Nothing." Rowena finished her soft drink and thanked them, and walked back to her grandmother's house through the late afternoon, past the last houses of the barrio, past the barangay basketball court, passed the point where the road ran alongside the fenced-off section of new cleared land. She stopped for a moment and looked at the raw ground where the old trees had been. Then she went home and sat with her grandmother and waited for the right time to ask. It was the fourth night before Lola Caring spoke fully about it, not because she was withholding. Rowena understood that now. It was because the telling had a weight to it, and her grandmother was the kind of person who did not put weight down carelessly. She had been watching Rowena across the evenings, over meals and prayers and the slow work of the household, measuring something she did not name. On the fourth night, she sent Rowena to close the shutters after supper, and then she sat down in her low chair near the lamp and folded her hands in her lap, and Rowena understood that the time had come. She sat across from her grandmother and was quiet and waited. Lola Caring began with Tandang Sorio. He had been the barrio's mananambal, a word that Rowena had grown up knowing the shape of without ever fully learning its weight. A healer, yes, but more precisely, someone who stood at the edge of the human world and knew what was on the other side of it, and knew how to keep the two sides in the correct relationship. He had inherited the role from his own teacher, who had inherited it before that. The line went back, Lola Caring said, as far as anyone in the barrio could trace. His work was not dramatic. He treated illness with plants and prayer, yes, but his more essential function was quieter than that. He knew the old forest at the barrio's northern edge, knew its age, knew what it contained, knew the specific terms of the arrangement that had allowed the barrio and what lived in that older growth to exist alongside each other for generations. He maintained those terms the way a person maintained a good fence, not because the fence was the boundary itself, but because the fence was how both sides knew where the boundary was. He had died in 2019. He had no apprentice. He had tried, Lola Caring said, in his last years to find someone, had spoken to the parish, to the barangay captain, to younger people in the community whose temperament or history suggested they might be able to hold what he held. No one had stepped forward. And he had died, and the knowledge he carried had died with him, and the terms of the arrangement had been left without anyone tending them. It did not break immediately, Lola Caring said. She spoke quietly and without drama, the way she described all serious things. These things take time. Like a garden you stop watering. For a while it looks the same. Then the road project had come. The barangay had been told it was a provincial improvement. Better access, shorter travel times to the highway. The clearing had taken 4 weeks. Rowena had seen the raw ground herself on her way home from the sari-sari store the day before. The red earth exposed, the stumps low and flat. That was the part of the forest closest to the boundary, Lola Caring said. The part that was oldest. The part Sorio tended most carefully. She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the frogs were steady and even. The lamp threw a warm, low light across the room. Everything was the same as it had been every other evening of Rowena's visit, and at the same time nothing was. Lola, Rowena said, what is it? What's calling people? Her grandmother looked at her hands. It is not a spirit, the way people mean that word. It is older than that. It has been in that forest since before this barrio existed, since before the people who built this barrio were born. She paused. It is not evil. I want you to understand that. It does not call people to harm them. She looked up. It calls because it is lost. The landmarks it knew, the old trees, the boundary that Sorio kept, they are gone or changed. It does not know anymore where its world ends and ours begins, and it has been listening to this barrio for many years. A breath. Your name is the first thing it learned. When it calls you, it is not threatening you. She folded her hands tighter. It is asking if anyone still knows it is there. Lola Caring gave her the instructions on the afternoon of the last day of Holy Week, while they were preparing food in the kitchen. She did not present them dramatically. She spoke in the practical tone she used for all instructions, the same tone in which she had taught Rowena to cook rice, to treat a fever with herbs, to navigate the particular politics of the barrio's social occasions, as if this were simply another piece of necessary knowledge that had been waiting for the right time to be passed on. Do not give your name. Do not go toward it if it calls. Do not follow it anywhere. Speak to it plainly, the way you spoke to someone you did not know well but wanted to treat with respect. Tell it what has changed. Tell it that Tandang Soryo is gone. Tell it the world it knew has been altered. Will it understand? Rowena asked. It has been listening to this barrio for longer than any of us have been alive, Lola Carding said. It understands more than you think. It is not stupid. It is disoriented. She set a pot on the stove. There is a difference. Rowena went to the bamboo grove at midnight. She told her grandmother where she was going. Lola Carding did not offer to come with her, and Rowena did not ask. This was something she understood without it being said. The instruction had been given to her specifically, and the going had to be hers. She put on her duster and her worn rubber slippers and took the small flashlight from the shelf near the door, and then she put it back. Light would be the wrong register for this. She needed to come as she was, without the apparatus of someone who needed to see clearly in order to feel safe. The night was warm and loud with frogs and the distant sound of the highway, that constant low presence she had stopped hearing during the day, but that returned to her at night. The grass was damp against her ankles as she crossed the yard. The bamboo grove was a dark column ahead of her, pale stems visible in the moonlight, leaves moving slightly even though there was no wind she could feel. She stopped at the property fence, a low wire fence, more suggestion than barrier, and stood with her hands at her sides. She waited for 2 or 3 minutes, long enough for her eyes to settle into the dark and for her breathing to slow. Then she began to speak. She spoke in Filipino, the way Lola Carding had told her to. She described the barrio as it was now, the new road that had come through the northern edge of the forest 3 years ago, the trees that had been cleared, the red earth that was still raw in places, the houses that had been built in the last decade and the ones that had come down. She named the families that had left and the families that had arrived. She spoke about Tandang Soryo, his name, his role, his death in 2019, the fact that he had died without passing what he held to anyone who could hold it. The boundary he kept, it is not the same now, she said. The world on this side of you has changed. The landmarks are different. I am telling you this so you know. She stopped. The grove was quiet. The frogs had not stopped, but they had softened, as if the sound were coming from a greater distance. Then the voice came. It did not say her name. It did not say any name at all. It was a sound, sustained, low, without clear language, somewhere in the register between a voice and the movement of air through a hollow space. She felt it in her sternum before she heard it with her ears. She could not have described it precisely later when Lola Carding asked. She used the only word that felt accurate. It sounded like acknowledgement, she said. Like when someone nods, like when someone says, "Yes, I hear you. I am here. I understand that you have come to tell me this." Lola Carding was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Good. That is a beginning." She called her school on the Tuesday after Holy Week and asked for an extension of her leave. The administrator on the phone was polite and confused. Rowena had taken only the standard holiday break, 5 days, and was expected back on Thursday. She said there were family matters that required her presence for a few more weeks. The administrator said she would need to speak with the principal. Rowena said that was fine. She waited while she was transferred and listened to the hold music, a tinny instrumental version of a song she did not recognize, and looked through the kitchen window at the bamboo grove in the morning light. The principal was understanding. She was given 2 weeks. She did not think 2 weeks would be enough, but it was a start. The elder she found most useful was Mang Carding, 83, who had grown up knowing Tandang Soryo and had assisted him twice in his youth with the seasonal acknowledgement at the forest edge. He remembered the form of it, if not every word. He sat with Rowena and Lola Caring for 3 evenings at the kitchen table and spoke slowly, the way people spoke when they were reconstructing something from memory rather than practice. Careful, approximate, honest about the gaps. The Mananambal from the next municipality was a woman named Ate Feli, 47, who had been practicing for 12 years and had heard of Tandang Soryo's death and the situation in Rowena's barrio through the network of healers and elders that still existed, loosely, across the province. She came on a Wednesday, arriving by tricycle in the late afternoon with a small bag and the direct manner of someone who had done difficult assessments before and knew how to begin. She walked the northern edge of the property first, and then the cleared land along the road, and then the surviving section of old growth further along. She was quiet the whole time. When she came back, she sat down and drank water and said, "It is not too late, but it needs to be done properly, and it needs to be maintained." She looked at Rowena. "You understand what maintaining means?" "Not fully," Rowena said. "But I am learning." Feely nodded. "That is the honest answer. We can work with that." The restoration took 4 days of careful work. A series of acknowledgements at the boundary's edge, offerings placed at specific points along the old tree line, words spoken at dusk and at dawn that Feely led and Rowena repeated. It was not the full practice Tandang Soryo had kept. Feely was clear about this. What they were doing was closer to emergency repair than full restoration, marking the edge again, making the acknowledgement that the boundary existed, and that people on this side of it were aware of and respected what lived beyond it. Re-establishing, as Feely put it, the basic terms. The voices stopped within a week. Aling Tessie mentioned it at the sari-sari store on a Friday afternoon. She had not heard anything outside her window in 6 nights. Ronnie, the tricycle driver, said the same. Rowena heard it from 2 other neighbors without asking. Mang Carding's wife came to find Rowena at her grandmother's house on a Saturday morning. She stood at the gate with a small packet of rice cakes and said, without preamble, "Medyo bumabalik na siya, parang mas present na. He seems more like himself again, more present." Rowena thanked her and stood with the rice cakes and watched her walk back down the lane. She filed for a second extension of her leave the following Tuesday. She was not certain which was the right person to hold the boundary long term. She was a school teacher from Manila who had come home for Holy Week and stayed. She had no formal training, no inheritance of the role, no particular preparation beyond the instructions her grandmother had given her on an afternoon in the kitchen while they cooked. But Tandang Soryo had died without passing the knowledge on, and the barrio had gone 3 years with nothing and no one. And the voices had come closer and closer to the center until they reached her own window. She was the one who had come home. She was the one who had gone to the grove's edge and spoken first and been answered. She sat on the porch in the early evening with her grandmother beside her and watched the light go out of the sky over the fields. And the bamboo grove at the property's edge was just a bamboo grove. And the night was loud with frogs, and she was still here. That was where she started. If this story stayed with you, I think it was meant to. New stories from across Asia, every week, right here. I'm Haunted East. Subscribe if you want to keep listening.